Musician, composer, and producer Bobby Wooten III to introduce our honorary for this evening.
While he makes his way to the stage, we'd like to point out that the award itself is a one and only, personally crafted by the Moth's longtime friend, Jonathan Adler.
For those that don't know, I'm the bass player of David Byrne's American Utopia. It's a real honor for me to be here to introduce him as this year's speaker, as Storyteller of the Year. David represents a lot of things to me in my life, and in 2017, it started as my boss. Now it's a little intimidating to be working with someone of David's caliber and stature, but David introduced himself and welcomed us and the band in a way that only David can. At the start of the very first rehearsal, the production manager approached us all, speaking logistics. The tour manager followed, speaking more logistics. And then David's turn where he said, bicycles. Okay guys, bicycles. I found this really cool bicycle and it folds up, and I think if we get a bunch of them, they'll give us a really good deal, so who wants a bicycle? Subsequently, at our first touring city, he would send out an email that read, so I'm going to bike to this museum and then along this bike path to this restaurant, and then I'm going to ride in soundcheck, so who wants to join me? And we did that in every single city that we toured for that entire year, literally flying the bikes with us to Europe and Asia. And as I was doing this with David, I started to see the world as David does through the lens of a bicycle. We would muse on things like architecture and fashion and local food and urban planning and how these decisions shape the communities and the people that they serve. I got that from a first-hand account, but then David would further invite everyone into this when he would tell his stories in his book, Bicycle Diaries. That whole year, in 2018, David was also my roommate and on the tour bus, cot right next to mine. And as much as we both love late night cheese, crackers, and mezcal, that was not my favorite aspect of living with him. I got to wake up each morning and watch the way that David would wake up in his way, where he would devour hours of news every single day. Because while he was a late night rock superstar hero, he was simultaneously curating his reasons to be cheerful journalism editorial. And I thought at that moment, wait a second. I could do something else other than music. There's a way that I can impact people outside of just chords and melody. And that right there would inspire me to start my own educational series in 2020. And I'm grateful that I am still able to thank him for that inspiration. As we continue to collaborate over the years, as American Utopia took us through multiple Broadway shows and film, we found ourselves in 2020 on Saturday Night Live. And I had read a stat that he had been the longest gap between an artist performing on Saturday Night Live was 30 years, which is a huge testament to his longevity and his ability to impact the cultural discourse across that time. So we were on stage. And I asked David, I was like, so tell me, what looks different here 30 years ago? And he's like, well, I don't think anything looks that much different. I was probably way different though. I was probably yelling at that camera person to make sure you get this shot and then this shot, and that production manager, make sure you do this and that. And I took that was a complete, I was kind of wow. It was a stark contrast to the David I'd been working with the past 4 years, because that person relies on the collaborators that he's with. He wants to see their genius. He wants to see all of them shine and listen to them. Whether it be the choreographer of American Utopia, Annie Parsons, and her direction, or when you see the show and you see Chris Giarma on stage, and he is Chris Giarma, and Angie Swan is Angie Swan, and I get to be me there. And it's very liberating. And I think that for David's way, that's kind of the only way he can imagine a Utopia actually working. And now I'd like to invite him up in the only way that I know how to, and say, Youngblood, come on up and accept this award. Maybe you can explain Why, let's have this as well.
And now it's my honor to present the Moth Storyteller of the Year, Mr. David Byrne.
Thank you. Thank you. This is an honor. Okay, I was told that as part of this, I'm obliged to tell a story. When I was a young man, I was saved from the draft for being drafted to Vietnam by this activist group of priests called the Byrne brothers. This was in Maryland, in Baltimore. I lived in the suburbs. They went to, I was in high school. People as young as 18 years old were getting drafted at that time. And they went to my local draft board, Catonsville, Maryland, broke in, took the papers, took them out to the parking lot, and poured handmade napalm on the drafts, the boards, the papers, and set it on fire. Yeah, basically destroyed the records in my draft board, and I thought, they waited in the parking lot. They waited to get arrested. And they did get arrested. And the reason they did that was that they wanted their trial to be like a forum on the morality of the war that was being waged, which many of us thought was an unjust war. And that happened. The trial was kind of a debate. It was turned into a play. It was eventually turned into a movie called The Trial of the Catonsville Nine. Anyway, I started telling this story that these people saved me from possibly being sent to Vietnam, to a war that I didn't want to be involved in. I told it for decades. And then at some point after high school, I went to art school. By 1970, I was in art school, and by then it had changed. The draft was no longer the same. It became a lottery. They picked your eligibility to be sent up based on your birthday. It was a random selection. People with low numbers were drafted. My number came up pretty high, so I thought, that's it, I'm clear. Phew, I'm good. So, I told this story for many years. It made me feel connected to them. I never met these guys, but it made me feel that somehow, even though I was a nobody, I felt connected to these people that I felt were heroes, that were brave, that they were doing something that, could I ever do something like what they did? Years later, I got a message from somebody who read an interview that I did online. And they said, that story you've been telling, it couldn't possibly be true. Your age is public record. We know how old you were. And you weren't 18 then. You weren't 18 until 1970. And by then, the lottery had been in place for a year. And so, the fact that they didn't save you from the draft, you were not in danger of being drafted in that way. This was deeply disturbing to me, deeply embarrassing, and humiliating. I've been telling this story for decades at dinner parties, and my friends. I incorporated it into who I thought I was. I thought I was this person that had this tenuous connection with these brave activist priests. And now suddenly I wasn't that person. Suddenly I was a phony, somebody with a false memory. That was the part that was really interesting to me. The fact that this memory, this story that I've been telling, it wasn't just some bullshit that I made up to get attention at dinner parties. I actually believed it. I believed it to be true. I don't know when that happened. I don't know how it happened. But I definitely believed it to be true. So not only did I now realize, oh yeah, this is not true. You've been telling yourself a lie for decades. Now you have to kind of apologize to everybody else and tell them what you've been saying is not true. Which I did. I posted it online and I said, no, that actually didn't happen. So in effect, what happened was, now my identity changed from being someone who told this false story and believed it, to someone who admitted to telling this false story and told everyone else, I am a person who internalized this fake story, a fake biography of myself. My identity was completely made up. Not all of it, just this one incident. And that became my new story, the story that I'm telling you right now. I realized that I wondered to myself, how many other things about myself are completely made up that I don't know about? Am I like this, scaffolding of completely made up memories and events? And maybe that's true, and I won't know until someone online says no. And I realized, having had that experience, that could be true for a lot of us as well. Our memories are completely unreliable. Yes. So, I thought, this is all possibly kind of depressing. But the good news, there is good news. The good news is that the fact that we can invent these, not just memories, but that we can invent these stories that we tell ourselves, these narratives that we tell ourselves and we tell our friends. Some of them may be imaginary, some of them might not be. But the fact that we can do that means that whether they're reliable or not, we can invent a new future. We can think of a story, a future that doesn't exist. We can think of a world, imagine a world, I went to a panel the other day, someone said, imagine a world without racism. Imagine a world that's different than the world that we live in. And the only way that those things can happen is if you can imagine that they can happen and you tell that story to yourself. So the fact that we can invent these stories, as everyone does in the Moth, is actually very important. It's a way that we create a new future for ourselves. So, that's the end of my story. Thank you very much for this.
Bobby!